and welcome to Coffee Break Blogging, where you'll learn to grow and monetize your blog in short, tactical installments you can use right away. Now here's the next episode in our series. Welcome back to another installment of Coffee Break Blogging, where this isn't just another podcast, it's actually a full course on building an online business based around your blog from scratch. My name is David Risley, and if you want to catch up with us from the beginning of this series, head on over to coffeebreakblogging.com to view the full archives. Okay, so today we're continuing on our series here about doing webinars, okay? Now, the last two episodes here, we talked about various aspects of webinars. In the last one, I talked about doing a live webinar versus doing a pre-recorded or evergreen webinar. Today, I'm actually going to talk more specifically about how to actually set up an evergreen recurring webinar, okay? So we're not going to talk at this point about the benefits of each or anything like that. We've already kind of gone there. Today, we're just going to talk about how to actually do one, okay? So the first thing that comes up here is, of course, what platform are you going to use to do an evergreen webinar? And there's a bunch of these things out there. I mean, basically, there's an old one out there called Stealth Seminar that if you do some searching around, you're definitely going to find this one. Stealth Seminar has been around a really long time, and it's dependable. It's basically rock solid. Now, the thing about Stealth Seminar is that it hasn't been modernized all that much. So it's a great platform, but some of the templates are kind of janky looking, blah, blah, blah. Also, in many cases, you'll find that you are having to work directly with their support people to enable you to do certain things because it's just the way it is. Now, so it's a little bit more personal service involved, I guess you could say, but it's just it's a platform that works great. It's just you're going to need their help to make it look right and whatever, and their templates are a little old school. That's Stealth Seminar, and they're one of the originals, really. Now, the thing about it is that when Google came out with Google Hangouts, that opened up a lot of different options for webinar platforms that were evergreen. And so after Google Hangouts became much more official, you saw the whole wave of various evergreen webinar systems popping up that all use Google Hangouts as its underlying foundation. And so there's several of these things out there. There's EverWebinar, which is actually from Mike Filsaime and Andy Jenkins. This one is kind of a new one. They have Webinar Jam as well. So those are kind of related products, EverWebinar, Webinar Jam, because Webinar Jam is from the same people. Now, before Andy and Mike Filsaime partnered up, Mike Filsaime partnered with somebody else and created an older system called Evergreen Business System. I actually bought Evergreen Business System back in the day. Ultimately didn't end up using it that much. It was a little old school as well in how it works, but there's still people out there who are using it. But nowadays, Mike Filsaime has moved on into Webinar Jam, and now they're working on this EverWebinar. Basically, Mike Filsaime is all over these things, I guess. There's another one out there called Webinar Ignition. Quite frankly, I'm not very familiar with that option, but I did see it out there. And then there's the one that I am using, which is Easy Webinar. Now, I'm not going to sit here and get into a big comparison between EverWebinar, Webinar Jam, Easy Webinar, blah, blah, blah. I mean, at the end of the day, each one is going to be sold to you on their website as if it's the best thing ever. That's to be expected. But in the end, they all kind of pretty much do the same thing with a few straggler features around the edges. The core functionality of these things is pretty much the same, and they're pretty much using Google Hangouts as the foundation for the actual streaming video, okay? At least for the live part. Generally speaking, the video for pre-recorded is going to go up on Amazon S3. All these systems work with that. We'll talk about that a little bit more here in just a bit. Okay, so I'm using Easy Webinar. That's at easywebinar.com. And that one currently, as of this recording, runs $397 annually. So you'll pay $397 and it will be renewed each year. But it might seem expensive to some of you, but it's actually not. That's a really good deal. And I mean, honestly, the amount of money that can be made with a evergreen webinar, it blows the snot out of a $397 purchase price. I mean, let's just call it the way it is. Okay, so it's a great system. All right, so let's move right now into the presentation itself for the webinar. Now, in the last episode, I talked a little bit about creating the presentation and things like that, but I wanted to, and we're going to talk about that more in a future episode, by the way, but I want to mention a few things specifically applicable to the Evergreen webinar, because in the last episode I said how it's best to do any webinar that you're going to do live several times before you take it to Evergreen. Okay, and what you do is every time you do it live, you record it. And then later, as you perfect it, you take one of your best versions of it and you turn that in to the recording for your Evergreen webinar. Now, but the thing is, here's the secret here. When you're actually doing it, you need to be thinking ahead in terms of the possibility that it might be an Evergreen webinar. And for that reason, you want to try to keep the date-specific things out of your webinar, okay? Don't mention something that's very date specific. Don't say, hey, happy Tuesday or something, because maybe down the road if somebody's watching that and they're watching it on a Friday, it's going to be a big disconnect. So you want to keep specific dates out, anything that would locate the presentation in time, because you want this to be a live, quote unquote, webinar for the people who might be attending it later, even though it's on automatic, okay? So don't mention specific dates. The other thing that's great when you're doing these webinars that I rarely recommend that you do is that that when you mention attendees' names and things like that, or you answer their questions because you're doing this in a live environment, it's okay to leave that in there. Okay? It's okay to leave that in there. It adds to the whole live feeling of the webinar later down the road, even if it's pre-recorded. Okay? So it's okay to include people's names and things like that. Third thing is that when it comes to the Q&A portion of the webinar, I want you to think ahead, okay? You need to think ahead here and be strategic about Q&A. If you get to the Q&A portion of a webinar and you don't have a lot of questions, then it's basically kind of like dead air, okay? It's kind of dead air, or you're going to be sitting there going, does anybody have any questions? It's just kind of weak and, it doesn't sound good. So what I recommend that you do, especially if you're creating a presentation that's going to be used for Evergreen webinar purposes, is you want to have some questions pre-selected and pre-written, even if you got to write them yourself, okay? Absolutely nothing wrong with that. Because you want to make sure that when you have Q&A that it actually is useful, okay? Obviously, people are not going to be able to actually ask you Q&A questions when they're on an Evergreen webinar. At least it will not be answered in a live setting because it's recorded. But you want to make that Q&A portion useful. So pre-select the questions based on questions that you think most people are going to ask, but also that specifically when you're making an offer, come up with whatever objections are going to be very normal for people to have, things that would keep them from buying from you, and you specifically put in questions related to that so that when you answer them, you handle those sales objections, okay? And you build that into the Q&A so that when the Q&A is there on the Evergreen webinar, that Q&A is actually part of the overall strategy. See how that works? Okay? And quite frankly, it would even be okay to assign people's names to those questions. I don't think there would be anything wrong with that. If you're not comfortable doing that, then just say, okay, well, one of the questions I have here is, and then you read off the question. You wrote the question. Let's be clear about that. But it's totally fine. Okay? You could even say, one of the questions I get commonly asked is, and then you say it, and then you answer it, okay? So that's a great way that you can approach Q&A and not be depending on what people actually have asked you, okay? All right, let's move on into setting up the actual Evergreen webinar. Let's setting up these basic options. Now, some of these are going to be specific to Easy Webinar, but the thing is, they're very generalized. That's why I chose these, because pretty much all the platforms are going to have these. First off, you're going to be looking at the one-time webinar versus the recurring. Easy Webinar will allow you to pre-record a webinar and actually have it run on a schedule, like as if it's a live. So let's say that you want to have a one-time event, or you only want to let it run twice. You can totally do that with Easy Webinars. But we're specifically referring here to the recurring ones. So obviously you would select the recurring option in the webinar system. Now, when it comes to your schedule, my current webinar, and I might change this up a little bit, but my current webinar is running every single day at 10 a.m., 2 p.m., and 8 p.m. So the idea behind those times is simply to give them flexibility, morning, afternoon, and evening, whichever works best for them. And of course, my system will present these times in their time zone, not my time zone, so it can be convenient. And it works out fairly well that way. Now, one of the options you're going to have when you select the schedule is how many days do you want to display to the person when they RSVP? How many options do you want to present to them? In my particular case right now, I am presenting to them 3 different days. Because see, when they get that form to register, they're going to first select a date, and then after that, they're going to select a time. So I select to present to them 3 different dates. And it starts off the next day. That would be tomorrow, and then 2 days out, and then 3 days out. Okay. Now, I might actually change this so that they have the option of doing it same day. It's actually been on my to-do list, and I haven't done it yet. But I would recommend that you test that as well, because one of the options that you're going to have is in Easy Webinar, they call it block days, where it's basically how many days do you want to block out. And I have it set to 1, which means that any time that somebody's on my registration form, it's going to block out 1 day, and the earliest day that they could pick would be 1 day out. I'm actually going to reduce that, and I'm going to allow them to select same day. It's that whole it won't be completely on demand, but I want to give them a little bit more instant gratification and test that out on the attendance rates here. Okay, so that's the basic thing. Now, just because I'm doing it a particular way doesn't mean that you have to do it. I mean, I'm giving them 3 different days. Maybe you want to choose less. Maybe you want to choose more. Maybe you don't want to run it 3 times per day. Maybe you want to run it more than 3 times per day. The beautiful thing is that it's very, very flexible, and you just let the numbers speak for themselves. Track your registration rates, track your attendance rates, and then start working the schedules around until you find that you get a sweet spot that maximizes your numbers. Okay. All right, let's move on to the registration page itself. Now, this is the nice, pretty landing page that people are going to come to, where it's going to have the title of the webinar and some copy that entices them to get onto the webinar. And then, of course, it's going to have the form itself where they enter their name and their email address and the date and the time that they want to attend. Okay. Now, any webinar system out there is going to have built-in templates that you can use. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel here. You can simply use one of them. Now, whether you like them or not is a different matter. It's completely a matter of opinion. Quite frankly, you could probably just forget about the look and feel, use one of them, move on with your life, and it will work just fine. Me, I'm a little bit more picky about what it looks like, and I kind of wanted my registration pages to be more consistent with my brand. And so I use Optimized Press for a lot of my landing pages, pretty much all of them actually. And I use Optimized Press for my webinar registration page as well. Now, the way that I do that is that Easy Webinar has a widget built into it that will it's basically displaying the form, name, email, and then based on the options that I've picked, it will display the date and the time selections for them. And it's a little widget, and it displays it right there. So what I've done is I create a nice landing page with Optimized Press, and then in Optimized Press, it has an option to put in custom HTML, and inside that custom HTML, I just copy and paste the code that Easy Webinar gives me, and it will display the Easy Webinar form inside of an Optimized Press squeeze page. And that's the way I do it, and it allows me to have a lot more flexibility. You could do the same thing if you're using lead pages or something like that. It would work just fine. And it just allows you to create a landing page that you like, rather than feeling like you're limited by the ones that are built into your webinar system. So regardless of all that, you're going to have to create the title of your webinar. You're going to need to write some copy that's going to sell people on the idea of attending that webinar. You're going to need to fill in your presenter information, probably upload a photo of yourself, stuff like that. It's all part of the game, okay? Let's move on to the thank you page. Now, Thank you page is very much the same kind of a deal as the registration. You're going to have to enter some basic info, what you want to say. It could be as simple as, hey, thanks for registering. I'll see you then. You could do something a little bit more strategic with the thank you page. Easy Webinar has an option to have a viral thank you page so that people can actually tweet out or share on Facebook your webinar, and you can incentivize them to do so by delivering a bonus to them if they do it. That's a really good idea, actually. So think about what is best to do. I mean, I've seen some people even offer a small front-end product sale on their thank you page. I mean, you could do it. Another thing you might do is if you want to give them some kind of a downloadable thing that they can reference while they're attending your webinar, you could give them the download link to that right on the thank you page. A lot of things that you could do with that thank you page. And in my case, I built the thank you page with Optimized Press as well. And quite frankly, you don't even need to integrate anything into your webinar system because it's just a page. I mean, who cares, right? All right, let's move on to the event page itself. This is the page that people are going to go to when they actually attend your webinar. And when you set this up, you're going to have to do a few things, one of which is to actually upload the recording of your webinar. Now, being that this is a Evergreen webinar that will be pre-recorded, you're probably going to have, and you actually should, have your webinar video be an MP4 format. MP4 format is the format that you want to use because it works well on the internet, works on mobile, things like that, okay? Now, what you want to do is you're probably going to upload this to Amazon S3, but specifically, you need to go and look at the help documentation for your webinar system because it's going to have specific instructions. Easy Webinar does as well as to how to actually do that because there's a particular protocol, a particular way that you want to set this up with Amazon, and it's called the Rtmp Protocol. Now, obviously, that's a little nerdy. I understand that. But basically what this is a particular way of pulling the file off of Amazon that is going to enable your video to truly be a live playback. In the last episode of Coffee Break, I talked about how you either have the embedded video where they just hit play and they pause and it's basically like YouTube, or you have the version of it that actually starts at the proper time, and if they show up late, it starts where it should be at that time. It's just like going to the movies. If you're late to the movie and you're 10 minutes late, well, guess what? You just missed the first 10 minutes in the movie. Sucks to be you, right? Well, it's the same thing with this. And this is by far the way that I prefer it to be with an Evergreen webinar because I want them to show up at the time they say, not just show up whenever they feel like it and they get to hit play, okay? By using the Rtmp protocol, you have the ability to do this. Your webinar system will be able to do it, okay? It's truly a streaming video, not just hitting play, okay? But rather than me get really super geeky here about all that, your webinar system is very likely going to have a full thing on how to set that up because it's something that everybody has to do, okay? So once you have that, you're going to get this Rtmp link to your video that's going to probably be sitting on Amazon. You would simply copy and paste that in, and boom, your video will be ready to go, okay? Now, another thing that you're going to need to do is you're going to need to enter the exact length of your video, and I'm talking about down to the second on how long that video is, and you're going to need to tell the webinar system how long it is. And the reason that's important is because if you're going to set up any timed events, it needs to know when to do it. So, for example, maybe you want to have an add to cart button show up right at that part of the webinar where you present the price and the offer itself, okay? But you don't want it to appear beforehand. Now, the only way that your system can get the timing right is if it knows exactly how long your webinar is, okay? Because then you can make it so that right when you say, here's the add to cart button, and it's even though it's pre-recorded, right when you say that, the add to cart button will actually show up right underneath the video. That's the way you want it to be, okay? So what I usually do is I just take the video into like QuickTime or something. I mean, I'm on a Mac, any video player, and you just simply go over to the end and you find out exactly how many, down to the minute and the second of how long the video is, and you enter it, okay? The other thing you're going to want to do is probably define a page that people are going to be redirected to when the event is over. Okay, makes the most sense at this point to send them to your offer page, and that's what I do. If they're still sitting on that page and the webinar is over, and I say, okay, bye-bye. Well, the recording is basically over at that point. I redirect them automatically to the page which contains the offer that I presented. Okay. The last thing I want to mention here about the event page is the social features like the chat and the attendee list. Okay, so all these webinar systems that do Evergreen have the ability to put in an attendee list. Okay, and what they basically will do is allow you to put in a fake attendee list, and it allows you to make the thing seem live, but you're basically plugging in people's names, and it's going to show up on this list as if they're actually attending that thing live. But let's face it, they're really not, because this is a pre-recorded webinar. And basically, I don't use these things. Easy Webinar has the ability to do it, but I don't, because it just seems shady to me. I'm not going to sit here and openly tell everybody, I pre-recorded this for you, but I'm also not going to fake it and try to make it act like it is when it's not. I'm just going to let people assume what they want, okay? And I'm going to present good content, and if they want to, ask me if it's pre-recorded, I'll tell them the truth. Okay, but I'm definitely not going to put in a pre-populated list of attendees. I'd rather display no list of attendees than sit there and fake it like that. Okay, because that just doesn't seem cool. Now, in terms of the social features, you have the option of putting in social things like a Facebook comment box or Twitter chat. You can use third-party chat systems such as Chatroll, which is at chatroll.com. Really good system, actually. I don't use it anymore, but I used to, and it's a very cool system. Or you can simply rely on the good old email system where they submit a question, and it's basically like asking you a question on the webinar. It's just that behind the scenes, it's emailing you the answer, emailing you the question, and then you can reply to them via email. And that's what I do on my webinar right now. It basically just emails in the question, so I can still get them, okay? All right, let's talk a little bit about email list integration. Definitely very important. You need to make sure that everybody that registers for your webinar gets put onto your email list, whatever system you use. It needs to go on your email list. Many of these systems will work with your email list host provider via API, which basically it'll just add them to the list behind the scenes. Some of them work by you taking the actual HTML code of your opt-in form and you paste it into a little thing, and the system is basically smart enough to figure it out. Right now, Easy Webinar works this way with Rtmp, which is the system that I use, and I just plug in the opt-in form HTML, and the system is smart enough to submit the data correctly. And then, of course, all the after-event processing and tagging and all that stuff I set up on the Rtmp side of things. That's not really Easy Webinar's problem, okay? But one way or the other, you need to make sure that you get people onto the list of webinar registrants, okay? Now, related to email, you also have the email notifications that you're going to need to set up. Now, so basically your webinar system is going to have the ability to send out emails both before the event and after the event. Now, before the event is easy because it really is preferable that you send them with your webinar system, because the webinar system knows the exact date and the exact time that they RSVP'd for. And you want those emails to be relevant to that. You might even remind them and have custom things in the email that dynamically fill in the date that they're supposed to be there. And the only way to do that is by sending the emails directly from the webinar system itself. If you tried to send them from Aweber or something like that, Aweber's not going to know when the person registered, is for the webinar, so it's not going to be able to direct them that stuff. So I would recommend that you send it with the webinar system itself. Easy Webinar totally does all that. You can also tap into a third-party system such as SendGrid, and it will send the emails that way. Now, you're going to want to set up a welcome email, which is the email they're going to get immediately after they RSVP. You're going to want to set up probably a few pre-event emails. And we'll go more into that in a future episode about what you can do pre-event to increase the likelihood that they actually show up. But just know at this point, you're going to write a few. And generally speaking, it's about reminding them to show up. But you want to also kind of tease them with some of the stuff to expect. Maybe you can give them some content that leads them up to the webinar, things like that. And those are all pre-event emails that you would want to deliver via your webinar system because it all needs to be based around when they registered, okay? And then you got the after event emails. Now, the after event emails takes place after their scheduled date and time has gone by. And you can either send that with Aweber or whatever email list host you provide, or you could send them with your webinar system. It really depends on what the best setup is. Typically, I like to do it with my email list provider because then I can be a lot more targeted about it. Okay? Which brings in the next topic here, which we'll go through quickly, which is the after-event processing, okay? Which basically means you need to treat the people a little differently depending on what they did. You know, you're going to have three groups of people. You're going to have the people who registered and never showed up. You're going to have the people who registered, showed up, but didn't buy. And then you're going to have the people who registered, showed up, and then bought. Okay, you got three different groups. You might even have a fourth if you want. That's the people who actually showed up to the webinar, but they bolted and left early. It would be best if your system could treat these people differently. So this is all part of the after-event processing. Now, in order to really do anything really cool and ninja here, you're going to need a marketing automation platform like Infusionsoft or Entreport or ActiveCampaign. Otherwise, it's going to be really tough to do. Easy Webinar right now works with Infusionsoft. They're about to release their Entreport integration, and quite frankly, I can't freaking wait for it. I need it badly. It's coming any day now, so I've been told. But this is all stuff that's important because, you don't want to, you got things like sending out a replay, and your system can automate that, but it wouldn't make sense to send the replay to somebody who attended the entire thing already, right? Or who bought from you, so you need to be kind of targeted about what you do here. All right, a few notes about setting up the offer to go along with the webinar. And this could apply both to live or recurring. The first thing is that you should send them to a special webinar-specific offer page. So if you have a sales page for your product, I wouldn't send them directly to the same one that everybody else sees. I would send them to one that was specifically created for webinar attendees only. And also, I think you should, have some kind of a webinar-specific bonuses or a discount or however you want to play that from a marketing perspective, but give them a reason why buying on that webinar is better than buying on your website in the normal capacity, and do that on a special sales page that is only for people who are attending your webinar. Now, like any offer, I recommend that you use some scarcity and urgency to get them to make their move. They need to make a yes or no decision, regardless of what it is, and you need to basically sometimes push them to make that decision. And that's what urgency and scarcity is all about. Some of the stuff that I've done in the past are bonuses that only are for the first 5 or first 3 or whatever like that. Now, obviously, on a Evergreen webinar, that's a little odd sometimes, but it can still work. Because it's first 5 and it just keeps rotating. A little weird, I understand. Another way that you can do it is to have a countdown timer. Really simple stuff. There's a system that I use called Deadline Funnel. DeadlineFunnel.com. Really great system. It is a recurring billing platform, but you can add so much revenue to your bottom line with this that it definitely pays for itself multiple times over. The good thing about Deadline Funnel is that it truly is real deadlines. Like it's enforced. I mean, if you tell somebody they have to act within 15 minutes, they're going to have to do it. All right. So those are great ways to enforce scarcity on your webinar, even though it is on a recurring basis. It can totally still work. Okay. Now, after you set all this stuff up, of course, you're going to want to go through your own funnel as an attendee of your own funnel, actually sit back and receive your own pre-event emails and attend the webinar and just make sure everything works before you ever let it go out to the public, okay? And then fix anything as needed. And then, of course, when you are ready, Well, you release it to the world and you begin to drive traffic to your Evergreen webinar. And you do this through all the traditional means: social media, your blog posts, having calls to action underneath your blog post to point to the registration page for your webinar. You can use paid traffic on social sites. All the things that you would do to drive traffic, you would do all that. Okay. You might even, like, if you're a regular podcaster, go out and buy yourself your own domain name specific to your webinar and redirect it right to your RSVP page for that webinar. So that way, when you do things like what I do and say, go to blogmonetizationwebinar.com, that actually redirects to the page for my Evergreen webinar, okay? And you could do the same thing. All right, so, wow, we came up to about the 30-minute mark here. So I gave you a lot of information here. I'm going to go ahead and end this thing off right here. And I'm going to say that, once again, if you've not downloaded the 60-minute webinar plan, you might want to go ahead and do that. A lot of times when it comes to creating a presentation for a webinar, you have that blank slate syndrome where you really don't know where to start. And so what the 60-minute webinar plan is a graphical, simple flow chart on how to do a basic structure for a 60-minute webinar. Okay, and there's some tips in there too on things that you can build in to increase conversions and things like that. So that's the 60-minute webinar plan, and you can download that at blogmarketingacademy.com/webinar plan. Once again, that's blogmarketingacademy.com/webinar plan. If you're finding these episodes valuable, I would highly appreciate it if you pop on over into iTunes and let me know. Let me know. Give me an honest review and a star rating. Just search out coffeebreakblogging.com on iTunes. Or you can actually just go to coffeebreakblogging.com and there'll be a link right there, right into iTunes. And I would highly appreciate that review. It would float my boat highly. Okay. With that being said, I will see you next time where we're going to continue talking about this topic of webinars. See you then. Thanks for listening to this episode of Coffee Break Blogging. If you like what you heard here today, we have something awesome we'd love to send you. It's called the Blog Conversion Guide, and it has 9 tweaks you can make to your blog in order to increase your conversion rate to get more opt-ins and sales. As one of our listeners, we'd love to give you access to this guide absolutely free. You can get your copy right now by going to coffeebreakblogging.com. Again, go to coffeebreakblogging.com to get your copy, and we'll see you next time.